recognize really the seriousness of the environmental pressures and challenges on everything in reality. You know, this is on human health, this is on biodiversity, this is on people's livelihood, it is on economies. So we understand really that there is a global urgent response which is required, and which is required from all of us, corporates, banks, government, regulators. Really, we all have to work together on that. What can we do as a bank? We thought that there was a great opportunity for First Abu Dhabi Bank to join the Net Zero Banking Alliance organization, and we did that in 2021. What does it mean practically? First, that we are taking a public commitment to reduce to zero our Scope 1 and 2 emissions, carbon emissions, by 2030. And second, we are taking a public commitment to reduce to zero our Scope 3, which for banks are financed emissions, by 2050. This is a big commitment. That's a journey, and that's a challenging journey where there will be some difficult decisions for us to make. But we are very committed to do it, and we are very committed to do it partnering with our customers and partnering with the government of the United Arab Emirates, which has taken a commitment also to be net zero by the same date. So a learning journey, because as I've said, there are many challenges and sometimes decisions. But what I wanted to say is that we are here to support, we are here to facilitate the transition for our customers.
Okay.
We stand by our customers in their efforts to achieve this transition, this energy transition.
Can I put this on the desk so I can see the slides on here?
The ADIPEC conference.
Thank you.
The world
and will I use
needs
this
more
rather than
energy
that microphone?
and less emissions.
This microphone?
And that's what we are trying to do,
to
facilitate financing for achieving this outcome. That will require more collaboration between all the stakeholders I've mentioned, but also more ambition,
hi, did you manage to
more
get in
boldness,
there?
You know,
Good.
to achieve
I know it
better,
takes ages.
So,
to jump the queue.
For today, our ambition is, in this conversation, one, to encourage more of our regional colleagues, you know, to start their net zero journey. First Abu Dhabi Bank is so far the only bank in the GCC region to have taken such a public commitment
but you always
to be
look
net
$1
zero.
million,
We need many more in the industry to join this initiative.
All odds
Second,
you always
it's not
fantastic.
a one-size-fits-all. You know, it's not that net zero will apply in the same manner for all industry sectors, for all countries. It depends on industrial specialization. It depends on the level of development of the economies. So we need to understand the nitty-gritty. We need to understand how it will apply to different economies and different countries in the Middle East. On that note, I stop here, and I will hand over again to Harry to introduce the panelists, but I thank you again for your participation and attendance. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks very much. And really good to hear about First Abu Dhabi Bank's commitments to the Net Zero Banking Alliance and its focus on customers. We've got a short presentation now from Sarah Kemet. She's lead for the Secretariat at the Net Zero Banking Alliance. Shortly after Sarah's spoken, we're going to go into a bit of a discussion, and you're going to have a chance to ask some questions as well. So Sarah, I'd like to invite you up to the stage to take us away with your presentation. It seems we might be having a couple of technical challenges. Well done. You've got it sorted. Over to you, Sarah.
So sorry. Okay, hi everybody. Hi everybody, and Good afternoon. It's great to be here, and I'd just like to first start by saying thank you to First Abu Dhabi Bank for hosting us today with this event, and also to the UAE Pavilion for hosting us. It's a fantastic pavilion. So I'm here today just to tell you a little bit about the Net Zero Banking Alliance. If I can make the slide change. No. Oh. Okay. Lovely. Okay, well, I think I probably don't need to explain the climate crisis to you. You're all here for COP27, and I think everybody really knows already what the issue is, but we do need financial sector leadership here. We know that if we're going to stand a chance of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, then we have got to cut our emissions in half every 10 years out to 2050. And in order to do that, we're going to need to invest. There's many different estimates, but something in the order of $4 trillion every year out to 2050. That's a huge amount of investment in technology, adaptation, mitigation. And we know that the private finance has got to be there to help the public finance, because public finance just is not going to be enough on its own. So what is the role of banks in the solution? Really, it's all about what banks finance, and we have started to be able to measure the financed emissions. Now, for a bank, the operational emissions, their Scope 1 and Scope 2, tend to not be that great. Their financed emissions tend to be at least 700 times greater than that. And banks have this massive opportunity to leverage the client relationships to help their clients with their transition by innovating and reducing exposure to fossil fuels to reduce their portfolio's footprint. So what have our members committed to? What they've committed to is incredibly ambitious. They have committed to set targets for 2030 or sooner and for 2050 or sooner. And these targets have to be based on science, on low or no overshoot scenarios. And these scenarios have to be aligned with 1.5 warming limitations and hitting net zero by 2050 at the latest. And as well as setting the targets, they've committed to annually reporting on those targets and also taking a measured approach to how offsets are used in meeting that ambition. So what does this net zero commitment mean? Firstly, it's systemic. We know that the solution to climate change is a whole system change, and banks are a really critical part of that. The financial system that is just not, the real economy is just not going to transition unless the financial system does so as well. And we actually, in the Alliance, we now have 40% of global banking assets within the Alliance that have all committed to aligning to 1.5. Now, that is sufficient to start to drive systemic impact. The commitment is also really very holistic. It takes a look at the whole of the bank's balance sheet. We've prioritized certain areas of the bank's balance sheets, especially lending. But we're going to be looking at the whole carbon footprint across these banks' geographic exposures, different asset classes, different sectors, etc. And like I said before, it's science-based. This is absolutely vital. We don't actually dictate the scenarios that the banks have to use to set their targets, but we set criteria. And those criteria are to be low or no overshoot and to rely conservatively on negative emissions technologies. And they have to be credible, well-recognized scientific sources. Again, transparency is a huge part of this. I mean, we hear an awful lot about greenwashing. You know, the private sector always gets a disproportionate amount of attention when it comes to accusations of greenwashing. But the transparency that our members have committed to is really quite significant. So, you know, they have to report against their targets. And whether they've set their targets on an absolute emissions basis or an emissions intensity, they actually have to report both. So we're really going to, well, we have started to see a huge increase in the transparency around these targets, around the assumptions that banks are making, and how they're approaching the problem. I think vitally, the last word that I have here is immediate. So I'm sure you all know that in the net zero movement, we get a lot of accusations that, well, net zero by 2050, that's too late. It's a journey, but we need to make sure that we're getting decarbonisation happening now. We've got to bend that global emissions curve down. And our banks have committed to setting intermediate targets for 2030 or sooner, in line with 1.5. So it's quite a big challenge. And today, I'm really thrilled to be able to say that today we have launched our first progress report as the Alliance. So this is just following on from our 18-month milestone. So we were founded in April 21. In October, our founding members had their first round of targets due. So I'm really pleased to say that the majority of our founding members, over 90% of them, have actually set their first round of targets, but we've also had about 19 other members set targets before that 18-month milestone requirement. So we're showing some really great progress there with target setting. And in this report, we also make a whole set of recommendations, really, to other stakeholders as well, so regulators, policymakers, and other stakeholders, and it's something that your clients need to be aware of, because it's not all in the gift of a bank to achieve these targets. We need a policy environment that's going to facilitate this whole economy transition. But, you know, our members are standing up and saying that they're ready to support it. So we've got about almost all of the members that were able to give us some targets in time to draft this report have started measuring their financed emissions. That's not an easy thing. We'll hear about that in a little while. We've got 2/3 have set long-term portfolio-wide targets, and 1/3 have set short-term portfolio targets for 2030 or sooner. And almost all of the respondents have set sectoral-based targets. So, and they've done that in, on average, almost 3 sectors. Our guidelines talk about 9 sectors where banks need to set targets. So it's a good start, but there's a lot of space to go there. So as the Alliance, we look to try and support our members. Recently, we published some supporting notes for our guidelines. They get into a little bit of some of the technical ambiguities around how do you actually go about implementing this commitment. And we also recently launched this transition finance guide, which really provides guidance to members to assess those opportunities and how to allocate effort and advocate for supporting policies regarding transition finance for the real economy. So our membership, this is actually already out of date. We've now got 122 banks in the Alliance, so it's a fantastic scale. We are one of the most geographically diverse of all of the net zero alliances, so we cover 41 countries, which is fantastic. Our members have 71 trillion. And like I said before, we've got 40% of the global banking sector's assets in this alliance committed to alignment. We've got some very big differences in the geographic distribution of our membership. So we've got quite good membership in Europe, Asia Pacific, North America, and even Latin America is actually quite well represented. One of the things we're going to talk about today is why do we have so few banks in the MENA and Sub-Saharan African region? We only have 4 members. So this is really the foundation of this event today. And we're going to talk about, some of the reasons for that. There are many, many challenges and barriers faced by banks in the MENA and the Sub-Saharan African region. One of those is the actual first question is, what is the role of a bank in the climate crisis? Now, even in the UK and Europe, about 7 years ago, if you went to a bank and started talking to them about climate change, they'd say, well, why are you asking me about that? It's not really got anything to do with me. But now, there's much greater understanding of the role of finance in this. There's issues around the relevance of the business case. Is adaptation actually more important in that region than mitigation? NISBA is very focused on mitigation only. And there are also issues around institutional capacity, etc. So I'm going to stop there, and we'll have our panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Sarah. If you'd like to come and sit down next to me, and we're going to invite up to the stage the other panelists. So I'd like to invite up Dalia Abdelkader, who's Chief Sustainability Officer of Commercial International Bank. And I'd also like to invite up to the stage Shargil Bashir, Chief Sustainability Officer of First Abu Dhabi Bank. And while they're coming up, congratulations on your progress report. That's really exciting news. And I think we'd like to certainly delve into that in a little bit. I think we've just had our 2 panelists join us, and I'd like to start with you, Dalia, if I may. What made you join the Net Zero Banking Alliance? I think you said to me earlier it's because of Sarah.
Because of Sarah, yes.
What are the benefits for the people who are listening here?
Well, I represent CIBO, Commercial International Bank, which is Egypt's largest private sector bank. When we joined NESBA as a founding signatory, that was in April 2021, that was voluntary. There was no stake. It was not mandated by anyone. Actually, we were going against the conventional wisdom at that time in Egypt because the country did not commit. So why would the bank take this step? And simply, it was the business case. We thought that net zero, the decarbonization, is the way to go. And we cannot stay fixed on old models, old concepts. This would have been harmful for our risk management and revenue generation and alignment. So imagine if we say no, we are waiting for the regulator. And by the way, the Central Bank of Egypt a week ago made it mandatory for all banks to commit to sustainable finance. What I want to get at is that a bank, to stay ahead of the game, you need to read the future. You do not wait to respond to regulators because you are in the kitchen. You are there. You can see the trends. That was our decision, risk management, because we want to purify our portfolio. Other than that, we will be fixed on fossil fuel in our portfolio and we'll pay the price when we report on the TCFD, bearing in mind the transition risk. After a while, we will be set with stranded assets. Revenue, as you mentioned, it's a market of $4 trillion. Alignment, we need to align. When we say Paris Agreement, Egypt's Sustainable Development Strategy, the Constitution has it, the banks have it. If you do not align with your ecosystem, you are archaic. So that was the reason.
Fantastic. And I think 2 things that really stood out to me there, the business case and the risk management piece. Shargil, was it the same for you for First Abu Dhabi Bank?
Yeah, I'll definitely echo all the points Dalia has made as well. But also I think it's important to remember that the role of financial institutions in our economy is to be the catalyst. And you need to take the leadership. It's important that you're there to support your clients in their journey. And we know that climate change is one of the biggest challenges we are facing on this planet right now. And in order to support our clients in that transition, support the government, support our stakeholders, we need to be basically able to guide them, support them, but also on sharing our best practices, knowledge sharing, on how you can basically start your own journey and how we can support them from a financing perspective, whether it's a perspective from capacity building, advisory. So it was basically that we need to be at front of the curve. And also it's a responsibility you need to take as a financial institution, just like we have seen historically, whether it comes to compliance, whether it comes to the digital transformation, the financial industry has always led on those topics. So I don't see any difference from a climate change perspective that the financial institution needs to take that role, need to take that ownership in order to guide your clients and your partners into that direction.
Yeah, that's good. And I think that's interesting. You mentioned the client piece, because obviously Martin mentioned that in his opening remarks as well, all about this focus on the customer and supporting people. Sarah, you just kind of moving on from what Shargil said and thinking about your presentation you gave earlier, you talked about some of these ambitious commitments. And as Shargil said, the bank's role is to be a catalyst. How many challenges are you seeing from the membership at the moment in terms of some of these ambitious commitments and what's happening from the point of view of your progress report as well?
Yeah. I think our members do face a lot of challenges. Some of our banks have quite big sustainability teams that are quite well resourced. Even they find it challenging. Many of our other members don't have such big sustainability teams and resources generally. So there's quite a big sort of hump to get over in terms of, finding people with the right skills and also, just working out the technicalities. So, I always think net zero, it's so easy to say, but when you actually look into what that means for a bank, it becomes incredibly technical very quickly. And you do need people that can start to measure the financed emissions footprint. And that requires data. Data is a huge, huge challenge. Maybe we can hear more about that. But we really need more solutions there. And then the technicalities of understanding the target setting processes, etc. So, the sort of challenges all the way along. And even, the technicalities around how you attribute your clients' emissions to the financial institution itself is quite a sort of technical matter. So I would say there's just this huge hump of kind of institutional capability. But then also you've got the need that, a sustainability team can't do this on their own over in the corner there. This is like a whole of business endeavor. And that sustainability team needs to work with the first line, the second line, the third line, all throughout the organization. And as you all know, when you've got a lot of internal stakeholders, that takes a lot of time and energy to get that buy-in and agreement and consensus. So, yeah, that's just a few.
Yeah. I think huge challenges, but opportunities as well. And I want to pick up on one thing you said there, specifically about data. And I wanted to ask a question to Shargil, which was, I think there's big benefits of joining the Net Zero Banking Alliance, and there's obviously challenges. But I'm interested from your perspective, from the data side, how challenging that has been, but also what have been some of the benefits of having to collect all of that data and get those insights from across your organisation, because I'm sure it's yielded some interesting things.
Yeah, no, I think data is a huge challenge, and I think data overall is a big challenge, whether it's data protection or it's about baselining. The challenge we have faced is that in the regional context, we are still maturing on this journey on sustainability and decarbonization. And the challenge here is that a lot of our clients, a lot of our customers haven't started their reporting or data journeys yet, which means that there's less data that is coming through the value chain for us to get understanding in order to set the baseline that how big is the challenge, right? Because if you don't have the baseline, you don't know what's your starting point, where do you start, and how much do you need to decarbonize. So that's where the data has really been an issue. But I will also say that the benefit you get of joining NZBA is that you get a common framework, right? And I think that's extremely important because before we had NISBA, each bank was trying to figure out and creating their own framework that how do we address decarbonization. So now at least we have a framework, which is a very good first step. Now we need to the next step, which is basically how do we take the regional context into play. So as an example, European Union, US are much mature in their data gathering from a regulatory perspective than you are in this part of the region, okay? So we cannot continue having just one framework, or you at least need to create sub-frameworks from a regional context. So when you are in the MENA, if you're in Africa, if you're in India, you need to have a different sub-framework in order to support your decarbonization journey. So data is extremely important, but you also need to now move towards get a regional context into play so we can measure our clients in the right context. But it's not fair to compare one of our clients in the UAE or in Egypt with a customer in the UK because the maturity level is very different from a decarbonization perspective.
Yeah, thanks. And that must have been a deeply interesting exercise, I guess, going through that data and understanding it. And I hear your point very much about comparing UK clients to clients within this region. I just want to jump to Dalia on that point next. I mean, obviously, I'm sure there's been huge benefits of gathering data for Commercial International Bank through this whole process. But I'd also just like to understand, from your perspective, you know, how should we overcome some of the challenges that Shargil mentions?
Yeah.
And how should we do that to make NZBA quite truly global and also ingrained in the MENA and African region?
Right. Well, further to what Sarah and Shargil mentioned, I think in my first intervention, the conceptual part was addressed. We saw the business case. This is one thing, implementation is another thing. Operationalizing the net zero is hassle. However, to operationalize it, you need to work at two levels. The first one, within the institution. You cannot jump from KG to a graduate program. So the bank should have the institutional capacity, which you mentioned. This was facilitated in our case by the fact that we issued Egypt's first green bond in 2020. And that was the time when I joined the bank. It was very interesting that the bank was attempting a new instrument at the peak of COVID. But since then, we established a very robust sustainable finance frameworks, including governance, policies, systems, strategy, even the data. It's a pillar within our strategy. So having the bank primed for net zero is important. And this will bring us to the fact that, as you mentioned, it takes a degree of maturity for banks to digest net zero. It's unfair you just tell them commit. However, even if the bank is systematically or structurally ready, it takes the ecosystem. This is the third level. It takes the client, it takes science. For the first time, we acknowledge science now, and that was not in our literature. This is new. And this will get me to the point. If we want to commit to net zero, you will have to be proactive about addressing data, addressing the emissions for each sector. I was talking to my colleague, and I'm very proud we have our colleagues here. At CIB, we have environmental engineers within the Sustainable Finance Department. This is very important, and this has been like very much of a catalyst, whereby we engaged our clients, we identified to them the risks and the opportunities that are related to carbon emissions. So institutionally, we are very robust, very solid. However, to manage the ecosystem, we started to engage our clients one-on-one in a program, under a program called Sustaining Sectors, whereby we focus on each sector, bring them over, explain the business case of sustainability, provide them with sustainable finance products. For certain products, we do provide certification like the EDGE with the IFC. So you work on the system transformation of your ecosystem. Nonetheless, it's difficult. We acknowledge NESBA. We were just discussing with my colleague. The guidelines are very useful. But implementing them, you do not provide us with the resources or even facilitate the ecosystem. Like, for example, in Egypt, the emission factor for each sector is not there. So you do your part, you do it beautifully. It gives us the literature, the understanding. But again, the tools for implementation, this is is very tedious and very granular. And this is something we need to connect on a regional level to take it to the next level, how to develop the emission factors for each sector. We joined the PCAF a week ago, and I think we're the first bank. It helped us measure our emissions. And the GIM, however, and I have to be very honest, and we had this discussion with Sarah, we did not set targets because we don't want to commit to something we're not prepared for. It needs some more work. And for us, credibility is very important, and we understand that this is a tedious process, and we need to be very much up to it. And hopefully, within the coming first half of 2023, we'll be there. But we set the baseline scenarios for the sectors. We're fine with that, but setting targets is something else. Thank you.
Thanks, Dalia. And very interesting about what you're saying about getting into these organizations, your customers, and who's working with you and getting into that catalyst work.
It is beautiful when you engage your clients. And I mean, it takes the first hour and they try to see the beauty of decarbonization because it factors into their bottom line. They save energy, it's waste water management. It's all about the business case. And once they see it, they start to get funds from the bank. We manage our risk, advance our portfolio, and cleanse the portfolio.
Absolutely.
So it's a win-win.
And I'd love to delve into that in more detail in a minute. But before I do, I just want to come back to Sarah. We've obviously heard from two of your members here, and I think you alluded to in your presentation about the importance of increasing membership of banks in the Sub-Saharan Africa and MENA region. How are you planning to do that?
Well, one of the really important ways that we're doing it, and this is the beauty of the alliance being convened by the United Nations Environment Programme Finance Initiative, is that we have broader work going on within the United Nations Environment Programme Finance Initiative in the MENA region. So we have work on capacity building and really helping banks to understand this really quite a complex landscape. I mean, you talked about PCAF. It's a bit of an alphabet soup, to be honest, and it's quite hard for banks coming to this for the first time to kind of understand how to navigate it. So we have quite a lot of capacity building work going on there through the Principles for Responsible Banking and through other projects that we're running in the MENA region. But another route through which we want to be making a lot of progress is through working with GFANZ. So the Net Zero Banking Alliance is actually part of the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero, GFANZ, which is a financial sector, kind of the alliance of alliances as such. And with GFANZ is going to be establishing regional hubs. So they've got one in the APAC region. They're in the process of establishing one in Africa at the moment. And we'll be working really, really closely with them on outreach, capacity building, all of those things. So, and I mean, you know, one of the really crucial things that needs to happen is, just as Shaka was talking about the data from the client's emissions, but we also, for the target setting, we need much more granular pathways to net zero for maybe at country level or at least regional level and for sectors. So we need to start taking these kind of global scenarios that give us pathways to net zero and breaking them out into sectors and regions so that everybody gets on the same page of what are the steps that need to be taken to get these sectors down to net zero. And you have to start to scratch beneath the surface and get into the details of each industry, because every industry is, you know, very, very different, and that's one direction where we're hoping that we can support, but you know, with others, because it's that's a complex process that takes a lot of scientific and economic input.
Yeah, I can imagine, deeply complex. And good to hear about the work you're doing with GFANZ and the regional hubs that are coming, and also those regional pathways. Shargil, from your perspective, thinking about this whole question of pulling in more banks from the MENA region specifically with where you're located, how do you think it should be done? What more could be done?
Well, we are sitting here at the UAE Pavilion at COP27, so I hope that when we come back to COP28 next year, we've had some regional support from NISBA. And I think that once you have the regional context in play, I think many more banks from the region will need to do and follow through, right? If you go back a year ago, UAE was the first country in the Middle East to in the GCC to join net zero, commit to that. Following that, we've seen many other countries following through. So I'm sure that other banks are right now looking into how they're going to decarbonize. But the step from doing your own assumptions and joining NISBA, it takes some steps, right? And I do hope that over now, since the next COP will be taking place in UAE, we're going to get more banks from GCC to take that step, engage on that dialogue. And I'm happy to offer that, we are happy to share our journey, share the knowledge we have built around this, because it's not easy when you start working with this. We are more than happy to join others and support and share our learnings, which we have gathered over the past year or so. So I do hope that having a regional context in play, COP coming to the UAE next year, will get more banks in the GCC to look into joining NISBA.
Great, and thanks for the offering and sharing your learnings. I'm sure some people in the audience would love to take you up on that. Dalia, I mean, from your perspective, thinking about the North African region and thinking about Sub-Saharan Africa as well, what do you think should the next steps be? And I'd also like to delve into some of the work you just talked about a little bit earlier about how you've been working with your customers and being this catalyst.
I think it's my accountability, responsibility, and I feel bad about it that I represent Africa on the Net Zero Banking Alliance Steering Committee, and ever since I could not promote it. Why? Because for Africa, they know and they believe they are not emitters. So, why would I work on mitigation? It's adaptation, as you said. But we're not doing this because we are emitters or we owe anybody anything. It's because it's good for our portfolio. So we need to engage them and demonstrate it's not a commitment, it's the business case. And this needs to be done. Purifying the portfolio is risk management and revenue generation. Second, once they understand and they value this, there is an induction process. You cannot go to a bank that does not have an environmental social risk management system or climate change system and tell them, join NESBA. It's as if you're going to someone who's in primary years and tell him that this is the high school curriculum. But we don't have the luxury of time. So if we're going to approach Africa and MENA, we need to consolidate. It takes the NESBA, the UNEP, you're doing a wonderful job. So it takes an ecosystem to drive a system transformation. It doesn't take a bank, it doesn't take UNEP, it doesn't take... I'm glad that GFANZ established a month ago the Africa Network, and we are on the advisory board. It's chaired by Dr. Mahmoud Muhiddin, the climate champion. And I'm very much looking forward to design a program, induction program for African banks, MENA banks. It's a fast-track induction program because we cannot afford to wait, that introduces them to the business case of sustainability at large, and then takes them step by step, how to establish your environmental social risk management system, how to report, how, until they reach to net zero. By then, I hope we have the ecosystem, the science, the data, the emissions, to make it work, and I think we can leverage the experience of European banks. And let me be very clear, not a single Chinese bank is part of NESBA. Not a single Chinese, and they are the emitters, by the way. But anyway, because it is the business case, it's not about the commitment. Just that.
No, thank you. And I think, it's some really good points there, and I think it is good to hear that that's happening with the GFANZ regional hub here, and I think that's really exciting. I just wanted to touch on, you talked earlier specifically about some of the work you've been doing with your clients and how you were acting as this catalyst and some of the roles you were playing there. What specifically have you been doing since you joined NISBA, and how has this been kind of interacting with your clients and the rest of the bank?
The program is called Sustaining Sector. For example, we pick pharmaceutical, textile, real estate. For the real estate, what we do is that we convene with the industry actors, whether our clients or potential clients. You're just advocating the industry transformation, and you introduce raise awareness about why is it good to integrate sustainability. We provide them with a portfolio of sustainable finance products, energy efficiency, renewable energy, green building, and in some sectors, we help them get certified. Like, for example, we have two mega real estate companies that got the EDGE certification with the IFC. So we collaborate with the IFC to get them certified. We started to certify auditors. Egypt didn't have EDGE certified auditors. And we started to raise awareness, and we sponsored it. We invite policymakers, we invite academia, because we want to integrate this in their curriculum. Every year, we find engineers, graduates, and then when they get to become executives, you start to educate them about design, about green buildings. I mean, we need to integrate it into academia to make sure we invest millions and millions in education. The best educated bankers, they have a barrier against environmental social risk, and it takes time to pave them away. I mean, this morning, our CEO, who is a guru, he used to teach Chase Credit course. And it takes time for them to reset what they have been educated. Sustaining sector includes connecting with academia. It's like an ecosystem for each sector, and it's working beautifully. We are having more clients. Our portfolio is being enlarged. Our risk is improved. And it is the pace and scale. I mean, end of this month, we're having another round for the food and beverage. Each month we have so it's good to address the pace and scale.
Yeah, I think some of the resounding things that came out of that for me is it takes time, but also you were saying how you're getting more clients and it's becoming more positive, and this is a really positive thing for you, and it's the business case. Shargil, what about you? I mean, specifically since joining the Net Zero Banking Alliance, how has this actively impacted First Abu Dhabi Bank's day-to-day work?
So, after we joined the Net Zero Banking Alliance, we also started by setting our own baseline and coming back to the challenge that we didn't have the data. So we joined the PCAF January 2022 as one of the first banks in GCC to basically use proxies to set our baseline and get a better understanding of where the challenges were. And again, 80% of our financed emissions came from 20% of our clients, right? So then we at least had a pool of clients we could start engaging and start understanding their decarbonization journey. And again, coming back to, as Dalia mentioned, that engagement is critical, and that is the key for success. In order to decarbonize, we need that collaboration between the financial institutions and customers. So once we started engaging with them, we got a better understanding, and we could verify the numbers and set the baseline. And then we could, based on their decarbonization journey and the science, start setting how will those targets look like. And then you start working with the different levers that, okay, what kind of renewable energy, what kind of innovation will support our clients in order to decarbonize. And then you start building your business case, and you start implementing as part of your business strategy that what will we be doing from a sector to sector perspective, and how can you accomplish that. But again, it's not a journey you can succeed in by yourself. You can only succeed in it by collaborating with customers, ideally with the policymakers as well, in order to succeed and basically be able to decarbonize. And again, and across this journey, you have a lot of collaboration, you have a lot of knowledge sharing with your clients as well. The maturity level varies a lot. When we spoke with some of our clients, they will have big sustainability teams, very mature. Other will have half a person working with sustainability, where the maturity level still needs to develop. So it's not like one size fits all at this time. You need to customize that journey together with the clients in order to support them on these topics.
I like that, the customization of the journey, and I think, Dalia, you touched on that a little bit as well. Before we just move on to my final kind of wrap-up question, I just wanted to give the audience a chance. You are able to ask questions, so do raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question before we get close to the wrap-up, and someone will come round with the microphone. But Sarah, I just wanted to go back to you. This whole piece of working with customers individually, customizing things, customizing things around the MENA region as well as the work you're doing with capacity building comes forwards. And with COP28 being in the UAE next year as well, we're staying within the MENA region. What opportunities do you think there are for furthering the aims of the Net Zero Banking Alliance as we continue to have COP28 in this region?
Well, I think there's huge opportunities to further it. I think Dalia summed it up nicely when she talked about the business case and also the risk management benefits, and I think it's just making that case. And I think one of the key opportunities is to kind of see the chain through the real economy and through the finance sector, because when you talk to your clients, they've then got a lot of work to do to talk to their suppliers. So it's all sort of chains of emissions through this real economy and then through the finance system, and thinking about the different types of banking activities that banks do. And we're sort of continually developing our approaches to being able to think about financed emissions from facilitating capital markets, which is very different to lending. When it comes to those kind of how you attribute those emissions to a bank, to a financial institution. And then, also the banks, interact with a whole host of other financial institutions and the infrastructure for the financial system. So Dalia mentioned the auditors, there's the payment systems, there's the whole sort of infrastructure that supports the financial system. So there's a long way to go through all of those chains, and I think one of the key things that people are really getting into now is what makes a good transition plan. And so throughout that chain you can see the transition plans of the people that you're linked to in the chain. So the banks can evaluate the transition plans of the clients, and then obviously we as the Alliance are looking at the transition plans of the banks themselves. So I think really the huge thing that's going to happen over the next year is we're kind of moving. I think people are starting to call this the implementation COP. We're starting with the target setting, and that feels like a really big piece of work, but actually it's only the beginning, because then you've got to work out how you're going to meet your target. So the next year I think is all about implementation, getting over that hump of building the capacity to be able to set the targets and know what it means, know what your baseline is, etc. Then between now and next year, we want to see some real implementation, because we're still not seeing that emissions curve bending down.
I like that, the implementation COP, and also what you mentioned about it cascading down through the different supply chains. I think that's a huge opportunity. Dalia, just to you for some kind of closing remarks on that. What, from your perspective, is this the implementation COP? And also, what do you think the opportunities are going to be over the next year in the run-up to COP28 for implementing the Net Zero Banking Alliance guidelines?
I think it's very important that we establish a governance mechanism for efficient, speedy implementation. We cannot just go stride here, another stride there. We have to have like a regional approach to decarbonize. And it's not just decarbonization. It's the circular economy as well, and it's biodiversity.
Yeah.
And if we go step backwards, I would say this is a system transformation. It's very tedious on us all. For a whole 100 years, we've been doing business one way, and all of a sudden, although science alarmed us 50 years ago, this year, by the way, is the golden anniversary of the Limits of Growth report, the Club of Rome. This is the 50 years anniversary. At that point, the statement was, the alarm was, if humanity, economies, continue with the same production and consumption pattern, we will reach zero growth in 100 years. And they were optimistic, because the biocapacity of Earth cannot sustain our model of growth. We did not listen. Now we acknowledge science. It's a bit too late. How to make it up and reach the 1.5 degrees, which is kind of existential? I think there has to be a governance mechanism, and by design. We cannot afford to have a FAB alone and the UNEP-FI doing a wonderful job. We are No, there has to be like, I don't know who would be this governance mechanism. I propose commercial banks. I mean, that's what CIB, we're here in this COP under the new role of financial institutions. It's a very powerful segment, very powerful to enact the change. We do it with our clients, and we have 3,000 clients. If each bank does the same thing, so I think we can convene together. We have the Union of Arab Banks, maybe for Africa, but there has to be something. We cannot afford to have fragmented success stories. We cannot afford it.
No, that's good. So governance mechanism, some of the benefits
Yeah.
are cascading down the supply chains from Sarah. And Shargil, I'm going to go to you for the same question to give you the final word. And please do keep it short, because I'm sure we're probably going to get kicked off here quite soon.
No, I think I only echo what has been said already. I think when we come back at COP28, if we haven't managed to get more banks to join in the MENA region and Africa on NZBA, I think we have all failed. I think that GFANS would have failed, the commercial banking industry would have failed. I think that the countries in the region would have failed, right? Because there's no way that we can achieve net zero without the involvement of banks, of financial institutions. So it's extremely critical that the banks go out and start setting their baselines, get an understanding, and in order to support their clients and be relevant to their clients for the future, start understanding that how can they support them on that journey. And one way to do it is by joining NZBA to get the framework done, and then we can start working on a regional context and say, how will this look like for Africa? How will this look like for Middle East? How will it look like for Asia, China, etc.? I think that's extremely important, and I hope that we can get much further ahead over the coming 12 months on that journey.
I'm excited about COP28 and to see how many banks are joined by that point. I want to thank our panel, because we're now at time. Dalia Abdelkader, Chief Sustainability Officer at Commercial International Bank, thank you for joining us. Shargil Bashir, Chief Sustainability Officer at First Abu Dhabi Bank, thank you for being part of this session. And Sarah Kemet, Lead for the Secretariat at the Net Zero Banking Alliance, thank you for a great presentation and being part of the session today. Can we give them a round of applause, please?
Thank you.
I think we're moving on.
Thank you.
Thank you so